Welcome back to the second semester of Mr. Grammer's World History class. So we're rocking and rolling here in the new year. We're starting the new semester off with our next unit on the Renaissance and Reformation. So we're going to be starting first with the European Renaissance, roughly about 1300, 1600. And this first video is just very much an introduction to the ideas, as well as getting into a little bit of the philosophy and kind of the causes that lead into the Renaissance happening when it does. Like we've talked about several times in this class, the Renaissance gets down to the idea of truth and where is an individual going to get their truth from in the medieval European world. So what we see here over time is a movement of a world where truth is based on faith. Most of the Middle Ages, you're having faith that the church is providing you with the right morals, with the right way of living your life, with the right way of understanding how things work to go out and do it. And you're accepting a religious point of view on how the world works versus a more scientific world where one's using their own reason, their own critical thinking skills to figure out how the world works, how everything kind of fits together, and where one can find their place in the universe, on Earth during their lifetime. So the question becomes, how do we get from one world, this world based on faith, to the next world, a world based on reason? That very much kind of is a long, drawn out topic and take a whole college semester class, if not several, on this. But we're kind of moving from, again, is this world of the Middle Ages, where there's one based on faith, right, to a rebirth of a new world with one race based on reason. Now, if you get into the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas and scholasticism, he's trying to make this kind of connection to be able to kind of go and bridge that, but it's not the easiest, most straightforward way of understanding it. So, how we move from this world of faith to the more modern worldview on reason occurs during the Renaissance. And we'll get into the definition of the Renaissance in a second, but just understand this is an artistic and intellectual awakening born out of skepticism and reasoning, asking questions, and then from those questions, creating ideas or experiments to find those answers in the real world. The skepticism is going to come out of instances like the Black Death, where we have a half to a third of Europe dying and people doing everything that the church is telling them to do, and yet their grandparents are still dying, their children are still dying, their loved ones are still dying. So, how does one reconcile their actions with what's still going on? As well as things that we saw during the Middle Ages, like the Great Schism, where we not only have the patriarch and pope yelling at each other over the quote correct type of Christianity, end quote. You have the Babylonian captivity where you have popes in France and popes in Rome, and that leads to people asking questions of, does the Catholic Church have its affairs in order, and is this the thing to go there? And again, we'll get into this this birth of reason of the gift of the Greeks, with this rediscovery of the Greek world and Greek philosophy that kind of bubbles out in the 1400s, that really is almost rediscovered and reawakened in the medieval world. So simply, the Renaissance we see is an explosion of creativity in art, writing, and thought from about 1300 to 1600. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and unlike what we saw in the Middle Ages, which again is a 19th century, 1800s term invented by historians that chunkify history, there very much was a sense of something is changing in the world that people understood during this time period. All right, and so it's very much this idea again. People are looking in their present time and seeing how things are changing, seeing how dynamic the world was of the Greeks and the Romans. Everything in between is that stuff in the middle. And so this is a rebirth, a renewal, and that's kind of what Renaissance means. This is a revival of art and learning. Now, again, that's a loaded term. We talked about all the art and learning that's going on during the Middle Ages, but the Renaissance is going to see an explosion of creativity and new ways of thinking about the world that we just haven't seen and did not see during the Middle Ages. So the Renaissance is where educated people, particularly of Italy, and that's where we're going to start today, hope to bring back the culture of classical Greece and Rome. And that's the whole big idea here is the Italians with how vibrant their economy and kind of society was becoming in the 1300s, 1400s are looking back 1,000 years prior to how great and dynamic the Roman world was. And they said, well, let's try to go and recreate that here in our present time. And it's this idea of trying to bring back the old. They ended up creating something new. The moderator of Cooking Club here at Joliet Catholic, and as you probably can imagine, we see all the time in trying to create a recipe, you add a little bit of this, you add a little bit of that, you make it your own, and you can, instead of recreating that old experience that you had with the old recipe, you've created something brand new. And that's really what the Renaissance boils down to. The key question that we want to answer today is of all the places in the world, of all the places in Europe, why Italy? Why is Italy the place where the Renaissance begins? And it begins for a couple different reasons. The first is that Italy in the 1400s is not Italy as you know it and see it on the map today. It is very much a collection of city-states from the tip and heel of the boot in the south all the way up to the Alps in the north. And these different city-states are all in conflict with one another. They're all in competition with one another. And they are very much kind of fueling this desire to one up each other and to be better and to kind of be the top dog in Italy, and that's going to drive and fuel a lot of stuff that's going on there. Now, the Crusaders coming down the Crusades are very much going to fuel the growth of the northern Italian city-states. We see that a lot. We see that a lot when we talked about the economic goals of the Crusades. But what these city-states in northern Italy are doing, creating an urban society where people are meeting new faces and new ideas, and there's this free exchange of people and ideas and goods that we see in these northern Italian city-states that we don't in other places in Europe. As we talked about, the bubonic plague, the Black Death, brought important economic changes to not only Europe, but particularly to the urban society, these northern Italian city-states, which allows in this reshuffling of these medieval societies and medieval economies that some people started to make a heck of a lot of money, particularly these northern Italian merchants. So the question then becomes, what does one do with all this extra money? I mean, you can only wear so many coats at a time, you can only wear so many shoes at a time. So one way people go about showing off not only their wealth but spending their money is by pursuing art, to have art in your house to decorate for decorations and for other purposes. And so that pursuit of art from these economic changes and this urban society that's being developed here in northern Italy is going to help be one of the reasons why we see an Italian Renaissance be the driving force of the Renaissance. Number two, these Italian city-states, as we talked about, begin to become dominated by the powerful merchants. These powerful merchants are not only becoming the economic leaders and movers and groovers in these cities, but they're also eventually become the political power of these places as well. Now, importantly, these merchants aren't inheriting their power and their place in society, but they're earning it through their business skills. And so that's going to take on a whole different dynamic. You're not going and being deferential to this Italian merchant because of who his great great grandfather was or what this person did in the Roman areas. You're doing that because this person by themselves created a giant business empire. And if you attach your wagon to their business, you can kind of grab some of the scraps or kind of, again, go along with the rising tide. So an example of this would be the Medici family out of the Italian city-state of Florence. And they're eventually very much going to become the dominant player in Florence, and then over time become one of the dominant players throughout all of Italy, even in the Catholic Church. We see several of the Medici become popes, and they become a major family in there. The Borgias is another example of an Italian merchant family from this time period. And there's several others, but the Medici and the Borgias are the big ones. The third one the third reason why we see Italy becoming the birthplace of the Renaissance is that scholars in Italy begin to look to the classical Greece and Rome. Now, one, being in Italy, you're surrounded by ruins of the past. You can't kick a rock without turning over a or looking at or knocking over a something that was left by the Romans and the Etruscans and the Greeks all before that. So you're surrounded by the ruins of the past. So you very much have a aspiration to live up to or figure out how a group of people from the same time from the same place were able to do this. We begin to see a new study of manuscripts in monasteries, monks and nuns very much looking to go to the top shelves, to the closed doors, to the books that maybe been knocked behind stuff, and very kind of going and looking at all the different stuff that might have been overlooked from before. So a new study of manuscripts, a new looking at stuff, looking at say like the Greek philosopher or Roman philosopher Lucretius and his study of things like that as an example of reevaluating older manuscripts. And then the other key event occurs with the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453, when merchants and scholars were fleeing Constantinople. One of the very few of the possessions that they grabbed were their Greek manuscripts, their Aristotles, their Plato's, their Hippocrates. To be able to grab those, brought them into with as they were leaving Constantinople to Italy, and then being able to translate these Greek manuscripts into Italian, into Latin, to reopen a lot of these ideas that had been lost in the West since really, I mean, almost the split of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s. So this is what Italy looked like during the Renaissance. Again, the key point here is that it's just a collection of city-states. It's not one Italy. It's all these different states all throughout the uh, boot, right? To be able to again be all in different competition with each other. And one of the ways they're in competition with each other is through banking and finance. And so we see the great rise of the Italian banking firms. We talked about merchants making loans and merchants trying to grab trade routes during the Crusades. And that's all happening here. You'd be able to go and if you're a knight, be able to kind of exchange your money for goods or be able to get bills of exchange at Italian banks, which is tables set on these outsides of these courtyards, and that's where the term bank comes from today in English, from these kind of money changers and money lenders that begin to develop in these Italian city-states in the Crusades and develop further from over there. We talked about different families ruling these Italian city-states. The Medici family and various family members are pictured here. And again, they're out of Florence, which is a major Italian city-state player that's going to come to rise during the Renaissance, and we'll see them be important players throughout the next couple centuries in Italy. Besides this idea of the Renaissance, we'll get into art in our next PowerPoint, but we have philosophical ideas that are also kind of being developed as well in this time period. And one of those ideas is humanism. Humanism was an intellectual movement that focused on human potential and human achievements. So if we can, in a very broad stroke, characterize most Middle Ages thinking about religion and God and Jesus' impact on people's lives through his teachings. Humanism is a movement where you're still keeping that aspect of your life, your religious life, but you're also looking at what humans can do in the here and now. And humanists would study classical texts to be able to understand these classical values, and that's where, again, these new versions of the Greek classics with their expanded chapters and commentary over the centuries from the East begin to add value for the Italian scholars studying or looking at these ideas with new eyes. Humanism, again, with its emphasis on what humans can do, creates new branches of study. So one can study the humanities today, and if you study human literature, human philosophy, and human history. Now, the important thing that comes out of humanism, very much for freshman lives today's, and a more modern view for a worldview, is, and this is a key idea, is that humanists believe that you can still be a good, faithful Christian, and then here's the important part, I'll get the laser pointer out, and this is a key thing, and also be able to enjoy life without offending God. If you, by the skills that you possess, by your ability to do business, just happen to also make money, humanists believe that's not a bad thing. That's something that you should enjoy. That extra, you should enjoy dessert. You should enjoy a warmer fur coat. You should enjoy a nice painting to go look at of the Virgin Mary, because that's not going to be offensive to God, because it's not your fault that you're being successful. So this whole idea that you can obtain stuff and you can live your life to the fullest without offending God is a major shift in Christian philosophy that humanists kind of go and emphasize, which is very much going to change how people live their lives up into the present time today. So what's one way you can go and enjoy your life? You can become a patron of the art. And this is someone who is a financial supporter of artists. You can be a patron of the arts today every time you, I know I'm going to age myself, buy an album, buy a CD, go to a movie theater, right? Watch a TV show. You're being a patron of the arts by supporting the artists. We have the school plays that are put on in the fall and in the spring. We've got the several handbells concerts. You've got the several band concerts. You, by supporting these programs, you can call yourself a patron of the arts today. In the Renaissance, we see patrons of the arts who are members of the church, merchants, as well as being wealthy families. The Renaissance writers also introduced the idea of what the ideal individual should be. And the ideal individual in the Renaissance comes to be developed as someone who strove to master, and we'll get the laser pointer out here, all, capital ALL, all areas of study. And so this ideal person is kind of referred to as this universal man, this Renaissance man, someone who could go on Jeopardy and win consistently all the time because they know all the answers to all the different categories. And this is very much explained in Baldassare Castiglione's book, The Courtier, that's written in 1528. And The Courtier simply is just a guidebook. How does one become a courtier, a person at the courts of the Italian powerful families of the courts of the kings throughout Europe? How do you become a successful person in there? And so this is a guidebook to teach you how to be an ideal man. And from this book, we get to see what people looked up for, what qualities were men supposed to have. And this is the idea that, again, you're supposed to be someone who's good at everything. Castiglione writes that you should be charming, witty, educated, someone who can dance, sing a song, play music, write poetry, be able to ride a horse, wrestle, handle a sword, etc. Again, this idea of a Renaissance man, a Mr. Cranmer type. All right, someone who can do all these things and do all of them well. And that becomes the ideal person in the Renaissance that one should kind of go and obtain to be. It's not just good enough to be good at astronomy, but you also got to be able to write poetry and be able to sing a song. You get the idea there. So that's what the ideal Renaissance man should be. In terms of women, Renaissance women are better educated than what we see happening in prior centuries in Europe, but still have, and the book is going to say, little influence over society. They're going to have a big influence, but they're not going to be out as public figures. They're going to be telling their husbands or their fathers or their brothers, kind of whispering in their ear and providing that kind of stuff behind closed doors. They're more showing publicly their better education, and we see that through paintings and other stuff, but again, still in the patriarchal society taking a back seat. A lot of things we have different examples here and there that kind of bubble up, but that's not real. Those are more of the exceptions than the rule. So that's Castiglione on the left, and he's going to go and write his book, The Courtier. There you see a copy from 1588 and 1528, and he's going and creating that ideal Renaissance man. And in the next PowerPoint that we'll talk about, we'll give you an example of what a Renaissance man in the Renaissance should be, and a great example of one when we get into Renaissance Italian art in our next PowerPoint.